questions.
Yo. I mean, okay.
I don't know if anyone's coming today.
I don't know. Slides 30 seconds ago.
Nice. Are you planning to give a talk on this, by the way?
Yeah.
Like at MesosCon or something?
Sorry?
Are you planning to give a talk on this at MesosCon or something like that at all? As well?
Yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense.
Cool.
Anything from MesosCon Asia, but I'll probably for US or EU.
Well, I guess people are not around. Okay. You have a dog?
I have a dog, yeah, temporarily.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hello. Yo, what's up? Many people. It was just me and Neil.
So we have at least one person who was not actually involved in implementing our role.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I like this topic. I want to hear what he has to say.
Greg will be late.
And then a couple viewers on YouTube as well.
Are they?
Yeah, it says two.
Hello, YouTube. Oh, there's one of them is yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. I hope we get a few more people to join. Yo, look at that. Peoples are coming. This meeting is like. Yeah. We haven't had anything for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if you don't have talk, we should figure out what else we can check. Like even the roadmap, we should at least do the roadmap reviews and not talks.
I don't see a tree.
Do we have any attendees for the community thing?
Casting looks pretty bad.
Oh, from outside? Yeah.
Hey,
Is that Nick? That's Neil. There are a couple people on YouTube. Okay.
Yeah.
How's the trip?
I don't know.
It's okay.
I'm getting like how many other people it was like 10, 15 people.
Yeah, it's around spring break. Yeah, exactly. My nieces were on spring break, so I got to hang.
You can talk about something, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so they'll be off school. That in Ohio? Yeah, exactly. Cool. Yeah.
I'm sure there is. It's just that people don't.
Proposal for me.
They'll put on the agenda probably, but once you pull them in, have a meeting, maybe they'll.
I think, yeah, it's a little cleaner than before.
Oh really?
Yeah, but still haze. Yeah, it's still kind of hazy. Yeah.
Alright.
Yeah, I also I just submit one last night at the last minute.
For the.
For the Mesos. Yeah, for the Mesos.
Do you know how's the submissions looking?
How many submissions? So by now it's 66.
That's it?
Yeah.
Pretty low.
60?
66. So what's the average number for Mesos North America?
In North America, maybe like in hundreds, maybe?
Yeah, I think it was like 120 last time.
60, that's not bad, I guess.
I think for Asia, it's already more than last year.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a little bit of like a difference because we had North America first, and so there's like a majority of topics proposed there, and then like, you know, EU and Asia had some of the like leftover topics, but this time MESOSCon Asia gets first choice at all the good topics. So like, there may be some people that are holding out to submit theirs for North America or EU, but people that just want to present wherever about Mesos topics, you know, we'll get a good chunk of them for. So I think 66 is more than we had for MESOSCon Asia last year.
Yeah, it's already more than that.
But not as much as we had for the first MESOSCon of last year, which was North America. I think we're in good shape.
Yeah, cause like there are some issues in Asia because, for example, the website they're all in English. So some like Chinese speaker, they might not they might understand a lot on tech knowledge, and they might have been using Mesos for a long time, but they cannot like write up a proposal in a very good way in English. So for now, Linux Foundation only accept English version.
Do we expect them to present in English?
No, we sent out an email in the mailing list saying that like the talk can be in Chinese, but the abstract has to be in English because the committee has to like.
People have to vote.
Yeah, and easier for voting. And yeah, it makes sense. I think it makes sense.
All right. So Neil is going to talk about hierarchical roles today. Doesn't look like we have anyone from outside joining.
Is Neil joining?
Neil is on the call. So it seems like the Hangout link is fine. Doesn't seem like I messed up anything there. Okay. So let's get started, Neil.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about hierarchical roles, which is a feature that we're building in Mesos right now. So background, what are roles in Mesos? People should be pretty familiar with this, but it's one of the basic things we use for resource allocation. So frameworks register in roles.
What's up?
Sir, what's up?
I was just gonna present to everyone. That was weird.
All better.
Go ahead.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, so Mesos uses roles as part of how it allocates resources. So frameworks register in a role, and we offer resources to each of those roles in a fair share, aka DRF manner. Within a role, if there are multiple frameworks in one role, they are also offered resources in a fair share manner. And then you can set weights to control basically the fair sharing behavior between roles. So by default, a role has a weight of 1. If you increase its weight, it gets a larger share of that fair share. We also use roles to manage reservations and to manage quota. So what problem are we trying to solve by introducing hierarchical roles? Well, part of the idea behind roles is to use them to manage organizations. Organizations, for example, one second. So part of the idea behind roles is to use them to model organizations. So within, so if an organization consists of several teams, let's say engineering and accounting, you might want to give a certain amount of guaranteed resources, quota, or a fair sharing weight to one team or another team. So you want to control how accounting and engineering use the resources in the cluster. In real-world organizations, they often consist of hierarchies with multiple levels. So rather than just having engineering and accounting, you might have engineering consist of several subteams, each of which might also consist of more subteams. So there's no actual direct support for this notion of hierarchy in Mesos or in the role system. So one way to try to solve this problem would be to essentially use roles to represent all the leaf parts of that hierarchy. So for example, suppose that we had Eng that consisted of a front-end team and an analytics team. If we knew somewhere that, we want Eng and organization to have a certain weight, within Eng we want to divide those resources between front-end and analytics, we could basically take all those leaf roles, so in this case that would be Eng front-end, Eng analytics, accounting, and so on, and basically figure out, okay, given how we want those organizations to compete for resources, how do we allocate resources to the teams? What properties do we set on the teams? And that would, mostly work, but it has two main problems. The first is that it's fragile. So anytime that you change the weight on any one of those teams, you might need to change the weight on the entire hierarchy, or on the entire set of leaf roles. The second is that it doesn't allow delegation. So we'd like to support the notion that you can have sort of a sub-admin, a sub-operator that is granted resources by the cluster operator for, say, the Eng hierarchy. Let's say the person who runs engineering. They're given a bunch of resources to use as they see fit within the engineering organization. And they should then be able to delegate or hand out those resources to the sub-teams below engineering. So if Mesos only supported this this flat list of roles, it wouldn't be possible to support this workflow. So instead what we want to do is add a notion of hierarchy to the role system. So that's basically the idea that one role can be a child role of another role. So and we want to extend weights, reservations, quota, and authorization to support this hierarchical relationship between roles. So let's see how that would work. So let's talk about how we do the basic allocation scheme, which is to say that roles that we now have roles that can have sub-roles. So in this case, let's say we have Eng, which has an Eng front-end and Eng analytics sub-roles underneath it. And we can set weight on both the parent role, Eng and accounting, as well as the sub-roles, Eng front-end and Eng analytics. And the idea here is that the weight on Eng controls its fair share with respect to other top-level roles or other roles at the same, basically it's sibling roles. So in this case, setting a weight of 1 on Eng and a weight of accounting, 4 on accounting, we say that we're going to give a small amount of resources to Eng and a large amount of resources to accounting. Then within within Eng, we've given a much higher weight to analytics and a much lower weight to front end. But the important point is that that weight of 10 for Eng analytics only controls within Eng who gets those Eng resources. So in this case, accounting would likely actually get more resources than Eng analytics, even though the weight on Eng analytics is actually higher than the weight on accounting. So roughly speaking, how would we think about implementing this, or how is it going to work? The basic idea is you build this role hierarchy, and then you essentially do repeated instances of the DRF scheme. But what we're basically saying is we walk down the tree from top to bottom, and suppose we want to decide on which role gets the next resource allocation. So if there's free resources, we want to give them to one of the roles. Which one should we give them to? So we basically do the same scheme that we do right now, which is in a flat list of roles, we give the next allocation to the role that is farthest below its fair share. So we just repeat that process for each level of the tree, starting from the root and going downwards. So the idea here is that Eng has a weight of 1 and accounting has a weight of 4. So that means Eng should 20% should be offered about 20% of the resources. It's offered slightly less than 20%. So it would get the next offer. Within Eng, we have a weight, let's say, of 9-to-1 for analytics. So in this case, analytics actually has slightly slightly less than its fair share. Front end is above its fair share. Analytics is below its fair share. So the next offer would go first to Eng, and then to Eng Analytics. And we'd repeat that process as we walk further and further down the tree. And then once we actually end up making an allocation or resource offer, we'd walk back up the tree and say, okay, when we allocate to analytics, that also counts as an allocation to Eng. So basically, by setting the weight on, one operator can come along and in this diagram set the weight on Eng versus accounting, and that controls that high-level resource allocation decision. Which resources go to the Eng organization versus which go to accounting. Then the subweights underneath Eng control how those resources are handed out among the Eng sub-organization. Okay, so that's the basic idea behind hierarchical fair share allocation. We also support, or want to support hierarchical quota. So the idea behind quota is that it's basically a guaranteed resource allocation that right now is made to a single role. So we want to extend that to the hierarchical case. So the idea behind hierarchical quota is that when you set the quota on a child node, you're basically, that quota is sort of taken from that child's parent's quota. So if we look at this example here, Eng is given a quota of 20 CPUs, accounting is given a quota of 40 CPUs. That means that the whole engineering organization, however they want to divide up those resources, get 20 guaranteed CPUs. Then let's say we have the operator of the Eng organization. They might decide that, okay, Eng front end gets 4 of those guaranteed CPUs, and Eng Analytics gets 16 of those CPUs. So they can then set the quota correspondingly on those 2 sub-roles to make that guaranteed, to extend those guaranteed resources further down the tree. And that would generalize onward if there were multiple sub-roles under, let's say, Eng front end or under Eng Analytics. The important variant here is that the sum of the quotas of a node's children must be less than or equal to the node's quota itself. So in this example, Eng front end and Eng Analytics, you'll notice that the sum of their quotas is 20 CPU, which is exactly the quota on their parent node Eng. In this configuration, we couldn't create another role, let's say Eng backend, and give it any quota, because all of the quota of their parent node, Eng, is being consumed by those child nodes. So a natural question is, what happens if, in this example, let's say we didn't have Eng front end, we didn't have, we said that Eng Analytics only had a quota of 12 CPUs. So that would mean that there's 4 unused guaranteed CPUs that we know should go to Eng somewhere, but they aren't being consumed by any of those child roles. Basically, we want to offer those to that subtree, but the exact semantics we want to use for making that resource offer we still want to exactly hash those out. So in the current yep.
Question. So does this mean that you cannot set quota on a sub role unless all its parents have a quota set?
Yeah. So when you're configuring quota, you always need to go from the top of the hierarchy down.
And there is no shorthand way to just say, if I'm setting on Eng Analytics and I don't set on Eng, I'm automatically going to set it on Eng as well or something like that?
There's not a shorthand right now. They're supporting something like that might make sense, like something like make-p equivalent. It might make sense. It's, we might want to either, you could either build tooling around Mesos to do that, or then Mesos itself to do that. But in the current stuff we're working on, we don't support that.
Got it. Okay.
That's a very specific question. So the quota is the guaranteed. Is the minimum CPU we can get, or the maximum?
So right now it's the minimum, basically, but we're planning on supporting other kinds of resource guarantees in the future.
Okay. Well, that's a little counterintuitive. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, so we also want to extend reservations to work with hierarchies. So the idea is that now when you make a reservation, so if let's say there's a, Eng has reserved resources, then that reservation effectively reserves resources for that entire subtree that's rooted at Eng. So if we have, again, Eng frontend and Eng analytics, if you make a reservation to Eng, those resources would be eligible to be offered to any framework that's registered underneath the Eng subtree. And kind of the workflow that we want to support here is a notion of actually kind of making reservations in a way that specializes resources. So we're thinking about a scenario where some operator, let's say, makes a resource reservation for Eng. Right? You might say that, okay, the analytics team gets these particular resources, particular amount of disk, particular amount of CPU on these particular hosts. Like, let's say the front end team needs resources on agents that have public IP addresses. So you pick those agents, you reserve those resources. Then within that team, so once the reservation is made to Eng, any framework within Eng is eligible to offer those resources. Once a framework is offered those resources, if they want to kind of stake their claim on those resources, they can reserve them from the higher level role, which is Eng, down to a more specific subrole. So let's say an Eng front-end resource gets offered some reserved Eng resources. They can then reserve those resources to move them from being reserved by Eng to being reserved by Eng front-end. Then when they're done using them, they can move them back and unreserve them, which is effectively going to return them back to the Eng parent role. So the important thing to observe is that frameworks in the Eng subtree, first of all, can't unreserve Eng level resources. So they can move resources back, in this example, from Eng front-end back up to Eng, but they can't move them from Eng back up to being unreserved. They also can't reserve additional resources, so they can't take an unreserved resource and ensure that it's reserved to Eng. And they can't use sibling resources, so they can't take, if there's a framework that's in Eng front-end, it can't take some resource that's been reserved by Eng backend and move it into Eng front-end. So one other wrinkle to talk about is the question. So far we've basically only talked about allowing frameworks to register in leaf roles and allowing allocations to be made to leaf role. So that's kind of conceptually simple to think about, and I think that that's going to be the recommended configuration going forward, is that an internal node, like this Eng role that we're talking about, nodes are either internal nodes, where they have no frameworks registered in them, or they're leaf nodes, where they have no child roles. Just in general, I think it's helpful to separate the concept of a team, like Eng front-end, from the concept of an organization that holds teams, like Eng. But first of all, not everyone might follow that distinction. And second of all, to support graceful evolution, we can't mandate, or we don't want to mandate that a role is either a leaf role or an internal role, and can't change from one to the other. So in particular, if you think about a graceful evolution scenario, right? Suppose that you have an organization that's using Mesos and they only have a flat role, a flat list of roles. And they want to gradually move from a flat list of roles to a hierarchy of roles. So let's say they want to replace the Eng role, which has multiple frameworks, with Eng front-end and Eng back-end. But that involves updating many frameworks, restarting services. It might be quite some time before all the frameworks are registered in Eng front-end or Eng back-end. So there'll be a period of time where there are frameworks registered in Eng front-end, and in Eng back-end. So what do we do in this scenario? So what we decided to do is to basically support what we're calling virtual leaf nodes. And that's the idea that when a node gets promoted from a leaf node to become an internal node, so in other words, when what was a leaf node, when there's a framework that registers in a child of that node, so it transforms that leaf node into an internal node, we basically create an extra leaf node, so to represent what was previously allocated to the old leaf node. So it might actually be helpful to look at this, look at the diagram here. So let's say we're moving from accounting an eng as 2 leaf roles. And let's say that then we have a new framework that registers an eng front end. So that's going to take eng and turn it from being a leaf role to eng is now an internal node. So we actually also create a second leaf role, which we're called, we are writing n/dot. And the idea is that n/dot will be used for all the frameworks that are registered in the eng role. So we always continue making allocations to leaf roles. Frameworks always register as leaf roles, just that we implicitly create this leaf role if necessary when a new child registers under what was previously leaf role. And the idea then is that when you set weight on eng, you're setting weight on the internal node, not on the leaf role. So you're basically controlling how eng is going to compete with its siblings. You're not controlling how that virtual leaf node competes with the other children of eng. So those virtual leaves will always have the default weight and always have the default quota. So it's a little confusing to explain, but I mean the basic idea is to try to use this concept to enable a graceful evolution from a flat list of roles to a hierarchy, or from one level of hierarchy to a more deeply nested hierarchy, and to kind of give you reasonable behavior as you transition. But the kind of recommended way to use this would be to distinguish between internal nodes, which don't have any frameworks in them, and leaf nodes, which do have.
So can you make reservations on a virtual leaf node?
No. So if you made a reservation to eng in this scenario, you'd be making a reservation to the eng subtree. So that would be that reservation would then apply to both eng front end and eng/dot.
So if I wanted my reservation to only be available to the framework that's registered in eng, I would have to change that framework to register in some new subrole in an actual leaf node.
Right.
Before reservations there.
Right.
Okay.
Is that acceptable?
Well, I mean, somebody's going to complain. I'm not sure if our company is going to complain, but somebody will probably be confused by that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal. I think, in one sense, what you're doing is you're moving from a configuration where you had multiple frameworks in eng. So you were already kind of making a reservation to multiple entities, right? Like that, you couldn't guarantee that reservation went to a particular framework. So you're going from that to another configuration where you can't guarantee the reservation goes to just one entity.
So there is a use case in DCOS. Right now in DCOS, we start the system marathon registered with the slave public role. Mm-hmm. And in 110, we're hoping to allow other frameworks to register in slave public /edgelb, for example. How do we make sure that the edgelb framework doesn't accidentally get things that are, I mean, I guess we're statically reserving those nodes for slave public, and then Marathon could dynamically, I guess edgelb would dynamically reserve resources from slave public into slave public /edgelb, but Marathon cannot. Mm-hmm. Can't touch any of those reservations, but can't make any of its own that don't get seen by edgelb.
Right.
Okay.
Like in that case,
Marathon could also migrate into slave public /Marathon or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because then all the slave public resources would still be offered to Marathon, in turn with edgelb. Yeah.
like if marathon change is told to slave public/marathon, then the reserved resources on those public agents would be offered to both marathon and HLB, I guess.
Unless Marathon reserves it, specializes on it. And takes
Yeah, if there's some, so right now we just want to basically say that those entire nodes are reserved for system marathon. And you can't really run anything else on there effectively. But what we're trying to do is enable, any SDK framework to run on the public agents, specifically this Edge LB and maybe many instances of this Edge LB. While also allowing Marathon to put some things on the public agents as well.
These reservations are static or dynamic?
Right now they're static using -- default role, actually, which reserves all the resources for that node for that role by default.
Oh, wait, so where would the Edge LB get its resources from?
The Edge LB would register in the slave public / Edge LB role, and it would get offered reservations, these statically reserved slave public resources, right? And then it would specialize those and reserve them down a level to its role so that when its tasks die, it can automatically relaunch them on the same reserved resources without Marathon interrupting.
Yes.
But Marathon, by default, well, I guess we haven't figured out exactly how we want hierarchical role Marathon to work. There's also some thought that folders would align with hierarchical roles, which would be a pretty nasty deprecation.
I mean, I guess what I don't follow is, if we're to provide some mechanism for Marathon to like put away resources at public for itself, that seems equivalent to creating slave public Marathon and reserving at slave public Marathon.
Yeah, so right now, yeah, we can take this offline. I don't want to derail Neil's presentation too much. This is a bigger problem that we need to solve as a company for 110 that the Mesos community isn't directly impacted by, but other Mesos distros might have similar issues.
Okay.
If they've used static and flat roles in weird ways like we have. Sorry, carry on.
It's okay, I'm basically done. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the kind of trickiest part of the design. It was figuring out how to handle this evolution case. And I think, I know no one was like 100% happy with what we settled on, but we couldn't think of anything better. So current status, we have a bunch of patches up that do the basic core infrastructure changes, fair share allocation, update agents, and do authorization. Those are under review right now, should make it in for Mesos 1.3. Then we're looking at making the reservation apply to a subtree. That change, we're just figuring out how to do that right now. Shouldn't be too complicated. Hopefully get that for 1.3 as well. And then quota, this notion of delegating that unused quota over a whole tree, that we might defer for now, but will probably come at some point. So as of right, the current status is that you have eng CPUs, and you have a role, a framework and role eng front end framework to get offered any quoted resources. That eng front end role itself needs to have quota. So you can't just rely on the fact that there's 100 CPU in eng, and because you're under eng, you'll get offered some of it maybe. You should say, okay, well, there's 100 CPUs in eng, guaranteed. Let's guarantee whatever, 20 of them to eng front end. Then you'll get offered them, but you won't get the delegated quoted resources offered in 1.3 anyway.
So I guess that's a bit of difference for reservations and quota, in the sense that if eng has a reservation, the sub role from range gets that reservation and gets to specialize them. But it sounds like if N has quota, the sub role cannot get the resources and I don't know, specialize them in a sense or own them.
Well, that's just the phase in which the implementation is at.
But is the eventual goal that if you set on Eng quota, the sub role could actually get the quota and I don't know, specialize it for itself or something like that?
As long as no siblings, like siblings that have more specialized quota would get that first, right? So any leftover quota from the parent, so like if I'm Eng back end, and there's no quota for me, but there's quota for Eng front end, obviously Eng front end gets that, but if there's leftover quota for Eng, then it should be available to any of the Eng whatever.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like Eng front end operator doesn't have to set a quota specifically. Like a framework can come into Eng front end and just take quota from Eng and use it for itself, just like reservation. Is that the?
Well, if you're the
If you're saying-
operator and you have access to specialized quota, I mean it's not even specializing quota, it's just setting quota on the child, and as long as that's less than what the parent has, that's allowed, and now you have quota if you're authorized to set that. And that I think applies. I think it's just like the leftover quota that is not, like if a parent has quota that's not assigned to any of its children, we don't do anything. The children don't get to see any of that. Is that correct?
I mean, what we're gonna do with leftover quota right now is, we haven't finalized what we're gonna do with that.
Is leftover quota different from leftover reservation?
Yes.
In what sense?
In the sense that if there are, let's say, 50 whatever reserve at Eng, then there are no specializations. Those reservations will be offered to the subtree depending on fair share, right? Whereas for quota, we don't know what we're doing yet.
But if it's a 50 CPU quota, it's not clear whether you would want to offer that to Eng front end and Eng.
Yeah, like maybe we would, based on fair share. I don't know. I guess if we do that, then it's the same.
Well, and then if there's somebody's just registered at Eng, they would get that access to that quota right now. Is that right? Or are they in the fake child role, the virtual leaf node that doesn't get access to the quota? There's no virtual leaf node math for quota, is there?
There has to be, I think. No?
Well, at the point when you decide what to do with the leftovers, you might be fair sharing between the virtual leaf node and the siblings. But right now, you only offer it to the intermediate node, which kind of pretends to be a virtual leaf node.
Yeah. So in the current set of patches, you would, if there's quota set on Eng that isn't consumed by a child of Eng, that will only be offered to a framework registered in Eng.
Okay.
Can a child be offered the Eng quota today in the patches?
Not a child will never be offered the Eng quota. A child will be offered quota if quota is set on that child's role.
Got it. Okay.
But that's not the design really. That's just state of the patches today.
Okay.
Right, Neil, that's what you were saying with the
Yep.
TB, yeah.
TBD for leftover quota. Okay.
Cool.
So I think we'll probably call it experimental for 1.3, right, Neil?
That seems reasonable. Yeah. It depends on how much of the reservations and quota change we get in before we ship 1.3. So.
I mean, it
Yeah,
sounded
I
like
think-
we had some discussions around, is it okay for us to change behavior of quota allocation after 1.3 and stuff like that? if we call it experimental, we can change stuff. That's fine.
I think it's a big enough feature that it has to be experimental in the first release anyway.
Okay.
You don't want to call features non-experimental in the first release.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense.
Do you have any more slides or content, Neil?
Only one. So lots of people helped out on this stuff. Many people in the room, but other people as well. And in particular, Jay at IBM has helped out a bunch with some of this work as well. So thanks very much.
Sweet. Thanks, Neil.
So I do want to briefly bring up, you mentioned when we ship 1.3, it's probably about time to cut a 1.3 RC1 and a 1.2.1 RC1 and all the other ones.
But I would look to see if any of those branches have patches.
1.2.1 definitely has patches.
Okay.
And
1.1, 1.0.
I haven't looked at 1.1.2 or
Okay.
1.1x.
Okay.
I haven't looked at those yet, but I know that 1.2.1 definitely has patches.
But they're already cherry picked onto the branch.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we checked a couple, I remember.
Okay.
So, I mean, we should probably send an email out to the dev list, announcing that we're going to, cut some of these releases soon, and people better cherry pick or commit things quickly if they want them in the releases, and figure out who the release managers are going to be.
Yeah, I guess typically for the patch list, it's been the same manager, but for 1.3, we need to pick a release manager.
Yeah, we need a release manager for 1.3. I'm happy to shepherd a new committer through 1.2.1. Because patch releases are a lot less stress and a lot easier to manage than major releases.
Who shipped 1.2? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then 1.1 was Till and Alex R. And they already did a 1.1.1. But it's probably time for a 1.1.2.
We don't know who's doing 1.3 yet.
We are thinking to ask Ben Mahler. Haven't done one for a while.
Yeah, I haven't done one in a while either.
And have like Neil and Kevin to kind of help out in terms of getting to know the process.
Impark's done one before. He could lead it too.
I've done a few before, yeah.
If he wants to volunteer.
I haven't done one in a while. I think the last one I did was like 27 or something.
Okay, between you and Ben Mahler, you guys can decide who wants to do the 1.3. Great. And Neil and maybe Kevin, since you guys are newly minted committers, probably it's worthwhile for you guys to shadow.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you can have a very close eye on which of your hierarchical role patches make it into 1.3.
Exactly.
Cool. Anything else anyone wants to chat about? There's something with the community stuff that wanted to bring up.
I want to chat about the CPU affinity stuff that someone posting the dev list.
Okay. How do you want to be closer to the mic?
Is that like CPU sets?
Let's get a mic. Yeah, I think that's Twitter guys that wants to have like a CPU affinity that I think their use case is like they don't want JVM to go arbitrarily wider. They want to restrict the core since they use CFS. They want to make sure there's no throttling going on if you restrict the CPU sets. They proposed something on the mailing list, working for feedback. I'm just wondering, like, do we have any? Should we set up something to get that discussion going?
Probably worthwhile just call them to the work group one of the Thursdays, maybe coming Thursday. It's probably worthwhile to just.
When is the next?
Thursday.
Next Thursday. Okay.
Every week we usually just cancel it if no one.
Okay.
Has any agenda. So if you want, call them up for.
Okay.
Next week Thursday work group. We can do that in person. It will be useful.
Okay.
I think it's worthwhile to it just depends on who has cycles to shepherd that stuff.
Yeah.
Does Ian Downs will he be able to shepherd it, or does he have cycles?
I can ask, but like probably not. I would imagine.
Okay. Yeah, we could. I should probably first ask them.
I can participate in discussion, but I probably don't have time to shepherd it.
Yeah.
I presume.
Yeah.
Um,
We should just ask them to come over on
Okay.
Thursday.
Okay.
First step, and maybe go over the design in person with some of us.
Okay.
That should be a good start to see.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll reach out to them. I think that's pretty kind of. I think we might want that too in the future.
Yeah.
I want it.
For a long time.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else?
Okay.
From the community meeting?
Mesos Con Asia.
Oh, yeah. We should try to market it, I guess, in our channels.
So we have like I think we have enough submissions.
66, you were saying?
We have enough submissions. We only need to pick like 36 from like 66 or 67. I don't know.
Okay.
So I think
And how are we
we're gonna
doing?
send out the survey next by the end of this week
Survey.
of like just like
People vote.
people vote for talks.
Oh, got it.
So it's gonna be just that week. So next week it will close the end of next week, and after that we're gonna decide which talk to
Okay. Who is on the PC?
Yorick.
Was that?
Yorick.
Your
Your-
Yours is the
Shah.
chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who
Who is on the
else?
PC?
Kirsten, Arden, Banish.
Okay. Are you on the PC or
I
not?
think I am, but I don't know if
Okay.
maybe it's unofficial. But
And in the past, we've allowed the PMC to have, some special like promoted talks, like where it ends up being, I think in the past we've done things where it's like 1/3 from one track, 1/3 from another track, 1/3 like PMC recommendations. Maybe 1/3 is too much in this case, but if
Oh, you mean
there's,
like the public vote only gets to half of the talks and the other half is decided by the PMC?
well, more like the public determines like 2/3 to 3/4 of the talks. And then if there's some that like, something about like, when we had the 1.0 talk, it's like, even if nobody voted for that, we were still going to talk about Mesos 1.0,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the previous times when I was involved, the reason why we had to do that was mainly around balancing across the
Mhm.
tracks. Like if there was some track that had like too many votes and
Right.
other tracks like dev or ops or something didn't have enough votes, we might want not to pick the based on popular vote.
Yeah. And then there's also some curating where it's like, okay, these two talks both got a lot of votes, but they are identical.
Yeah.
You can ask people to co-present or,
I don't know if that was done by the PMC or just the PC.
I don't know. I think there was I remember at one
I think it's
time there-
PC.
the PC does most of that work, but they may like ask the PMC for like some final approval
Yeah.
or recommendations or anything that didn't make it into the top 30
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
so-
you want in the final 6.
Yeah, I think the immediate action item is when we send out this like vote emails that reach out to your connections, Aurora, Marathon, all these like the Mesos ecosystem to make sure they vote on those talks.
So we feel like we have enough submissions.
Yeah, we have enough submissions.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I skimmed the talks. I think like most of them are foreign users
Okay, that's good.
because there's only one vendor.
Okay.
Pretty much. For Mesos, there's only one vendor, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of users,
Okay.
actual users,
Okay.
which is good.
And sponsorship and everything is.
Sponsorship, if you can reach out to your network, that would be great. So we don't have a lot of sponsorship, but I mainly blame like Linux Foundation not doing a good job, doing the work in China, because they're another conference right before MesosCon, which is like LinuxCon, ContainerCon, Cloud Open. So that one don't have any don't have a lot of sponsorship as well.
Okay.
So I blame Linux Foundation not doing their job. But we should reach out to our connections to make sure that if we can get sponsorship, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, the place, the China is one of the most expensive place to host a conference.
Okay.
Yeah, and Linux Foundation can have to pay a lot for for the Linux cloud, Mesos cloud.
Okay.
They're really expensive.
Okay, that's all about Mesos cloud.
Cool. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks for coming. Thanks, Neil, for the presentation.
Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye.
Thanks.